the first intact Viking boat burial site.
This Viking ship was preserved like a tinned Viking ship, really. No one had seen anything like it. It was even so well preserved that one day the archaeologists found a bucket.
For centuries, villagers whispered that the massive mound in Norway was cursed. Animals refused to graze near it. People claimed to see smoke rise from its peak at night. And one boy who dared to climb it died mysteriously soon after. No one dared disturb it until archaeologists finally broke the ground. What they uncovered proved that the legends were not just superstition. The truth inside was far more unsettling. The cursed mound of Nordfjord. In the heart of Nordfjord, a quiet town in western Norway, there stands a mound that has loomed over the landscape for more than 1,000 years.
Viking longship archaeologists use a high-resolution ground-penetrating georadar to find the nearly 66-foot longship buried less than 2 feet below the topsoil.
Locals call it Rundahuggen, though it is also known by the names Mound 1 or Lysja Skjoratippen. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a great green hill. But beneath its grassy surface lies a story that has fascinated and frightened people for centuries. The mound belongs to the Viking Age, built in the middle of the 9th century when Norway was still divided among petty kings and warlords. Archaeologists today know it as one of the 7 great burial mounds in the country. But to those who lived nearby for generations, it was something far more mysterious. They did not see it as just a grave. They saw it as a warning. Its sheer size alone makes it impossible to ignore. Rundahuggen is about 30 meters across and nearly 4 meters tall, a vast dome of earth that dwarfs the surrounding ground. To build something on that scale in the Viking Age would have required enormous effort, hundreds of hands moving soil and stones, and the authority of someone powerful enough to command them. The mound rises directly from the Myklebust farm in Nordfjord's town center, and it is surrounded by other burial mounds. At one time, there were 5 great mounds here, marking the settlement as a center of wealth and leadership. Archaeological traces of old farm structures confirm that this was not just farmland, but the seat of a chieftain or king. For centuries, villagers wondered who could possibly lie beneath Rundahuggen. The stories passed down suggested that it was the grave of a mighty king, a man who once ruled the fjords with wealth and warships. Yet the tales also carried a darker edge. They said the mound was cursed. People whispered that strange noises came from inside it, like wood cracking and iron twisting. Farmers swore their animals refused to graze near it, as if some unseen force kept them away. On cold nights, some villagers claimed to see smoke curling up from the top of the mound, thin wisps against the starlit sky, even when there was no fire. The air carried a bitter smell, sharp and heavy, as if something had been burned alive inside long ago, but still smoldered. Parents told their children never to climb it, and most obeyed, for fear that something inside was not at rest. One tale in particular haunted the community. It was said that a boy once scrambled to the top of the mound, laughing as he looked down over the fields, but when he returned home, his face was pale and his body shook as if he had been chilled to the bone. He soon fell ill. His hair began to fall out in clumps. His skin turned gray and lifeless. Within weeks, he was dead. No wound could be found. No disease explained his decline. To the villagers, the message was clear. The mound itself had killed him. Over time, these stories hardened into rules. No one went near the mound, no one tilled its soil or built upon it. The people of Nordfjord left Rundahuggen alone, because in their eyes, whatever lay beneath had not finished burning. Yet, as centuries passed and outsiders arrived, the old warnings began to fade. In the 19th century, Norway's growing interest in its Viking past drew archaeologists and treasure seekers alike. But when the archaeologists broke its seal, they found that the truth inside was even more unsettling than the myths. Anders Lorange opens the earth. In 1874, the silence of Rundahuggen was finally broken. For centuries, the mound had been left alone, feared by locals, whispered about in hushed voices. But Anders Lorange, a naval officer turned archaeologist, saw it not as a curse, but as an opportunity. With growing pride in Norway's Viking past, he believed the mound might hold a buried longship of immense importance, perhaps even the grave of a king. Lorange came to Nordfjord with a small team, equipped with picks and shovels, determined to peel back the earth. He chose to dig a trench that cut straight through the side of the mound, eventually removing nearly a quarter of its mass. To the villagers who gathered nearby, it must have seemed like an act of defiance against something ancient. Some shook their heads, others crossed themselves, but Lorange pressed forward. Almost immediately, it was clear this was not going to be like the other famous Viking ship burials. The soil inside was blackened and heavy, filled with layers of charcoal and ash. Instead of a carefully laid vessel preserved by centuries underground, Lorange uncovered the ghost of something that had been deliberately burned. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. What lay beneath had been a funeral pyre, not a traditional burial. Within the mound, two distinct ash layers appeared. Lorange interpreted these as the collapsed remains of the bow and stern of a massive longship. Whatever ship had once been here had been destroyed in the fire, its timbers reduced to black dust and fragments. Yet, enough survived to hint at its scale. The key lay in the ironwork that the flames could not consume. His team recovered more than 750 rivets and nails, the fastenings that once held the longship together. They were scattered, twisted, and broken, but they revealed the outline of a vessel so large it could only have belonged to someone of great power. Even ruined, the ship testified to immense wealth and authority. Then, from the heart of the mound, Lorange uncovered something extraordinary. A bronze vessel of Celtic or Irish origin, enameled and ornate, far older than the grave itself. Such an object would have traveled across seas before reaching Norway, perhaps as loot, tribute, or trade. Inside it, carefully placed amid the destruction, were cremated human remains. The bones belonged to a man, thought to be between 30 and 35 years old at the time of his death. Around this vessel lay the broken and burned remnants of weapons and objects. Fragments of swords, spears, arrowheads, and tools emerged from the ashes. There were even signs of animals sacrificed during the funeral, their bones blackened like the rest. These discoveries pointed to a burial of someone with both military status and wealth, a leader of men whose death demanded ceremony on a grand scale. And yet, the manner of the burial, the fire that consumed the ship and left chaos instead of order, suggested something unusual. This was not the honor-filled display seen in other Viking graves. It felt harsher, more destructive, as if erasing rather than preserving memory. The prison of shields. When Lorange's trench cut deeper into the mound, the story of the burial began to take shape. What had first appeared as a sea of ash and rivets slowly revealed itself to be more than just the remains of a ship. Among the blackened fragments lay evidence of ritual, order, and intention, though twisted into a form unlike any Viking burial he had studied before. The most striking discovery came when his team unearthed dozens of shield bosses. These rounded iron domes once sat at the center of wooden shields, protecting the warrior's hand during battle. They were objects of war, reminders of a life lived with sword and spear in hand. Lorange counted 44 in all, scattered across the mound. The number suggested that the ship, when whole, may have carried at least 22 shields on each side. This alone marked the buried man as a leader, for only someone commanding many warriors would have been surrounded by so many weapons of defense. But what chilled Lorange was the arrangement of some of these shields. At the very heart of the mound, on top of a bronze vessel that held the cremated bones of the dead man, lay 12 shield bosses carefully stacked. They were not displayed outward in honor, as shields often were in other Viking burials. Instead, they were placed in a way that seemed to pin the vessel down, as if to close it in. To Lorange's eye, the effect was not celebratory, it was confining. Inside the bronze urn were the charred remains of a male, estimated to be between 30 and 35 years old. Some whispered he could have been older, perhaps into his 50s, but most evidence suggested a man in the prime of his life. This man had once commanded enough respect to be buried in a ship and surrounded by weapons and imported goods, yet the way his remains were treated told a story of unease. Instead of lying beneath shields that declared his honor, he lay imprisoned beneath them. The symbolism was haunting. Viking burials were meant to tell stories, to proclaim to the living and to the afterlife who the dead person had been. At Oseberg and Gokstad, shields were arranged outward, painted and proudly displayed, turning the ship into both a vessel and a monument. But at Myklebust, the shields were stacked inward, heavy and plain, closing off the dead man's remains from the world above. It was as if those who buried him wanted not only to honor his strength, but also to contain it. Standing in the trench, Lorange must have felt the tension of two opposing forces. On one hand, the burial spoke of wealth, strength, and status. On the other, it felt like an attempt to erase, to deny the dead man the clear memory that other Viking graves provided. The shields over his urn were both honor and prison, recognition and rejection. They told the world that he had been powerful, but also that his power was not trusted, not even after death. The mound had become a paradox. It was enormous, demanding attention, yet filled with silence. It revealed fragments of a story but refused to give the whole truth. Who was this man whose ship was burned into ash, whose bones were locked under shields, whose weapons were destroyed instead of celebrated? Why did those who buried him choose to both recognize his greatness and erase it in the same breath? The grave of erasure. What Anders Lorange uncovered at Myklebust was unlike anything seen in Norway before. Other famous Viking ship burials, such as Oseberg and Gokstad, had revealed magnificent vessels preserved in the earth. Their planks, carvings, and even textiles survived the centuries, giving a vivid picture of how Vikings honored their dead. But Myklebust told a different story. Instead of preservation, there was destruction. Instead of remembrance, there was silence. It remains the only known Viking ship burial in Norway, where cremation was carried out on such a scale. The entire ship was burned in place, transforming what should have been a vessel of eternal journey into a mound of ash and iron. This was not the careful arrangement of wealth and honor that archaeologists had come to expect. It was something harsher, something that seemed designed to strip away identity rather than preserve it. Because of this cremation, very little of the original ship remained. No graceful curve of planks survived, no wooden carvings or fragments of the hull to measure its shape. The fire had consumed everything organic, leaving behind only blackened earth, twisted rivets, and charcoal. Where other Viking burials offered painted shields and finely woven cloth, Myklebust gave nothing but the smell of smoke and the traces of ruin. The absence of perishable goods was also striking. At Oseberg, delicate wooden carvings, textiles, and even fragments of fine clothing gave archaeologists a glimpse of Viking artistry. At Gokstad, sleds, gaming boards, and exotic items like a peacock survived long enough to tell the story of the man buried there. But at Myklebust, nothing of that sort remained. If such objects had once been present, the fire destroyed every last trace. The mound seemed determined to erase not only the man, but every sign of his life and culture. For archaeologists, Myklebust became known as a grave of absence rather than presence. It was not just that objects were destroyed, it was that meaning itself had been stripped away. Viking burials usually proclaimed status, faith, and legacy. They included amulets, weapons, animals, and tokens to guide the dead into the afterlife. Here, none of that could be seen. The silence was louder than any discovery. When the excavation was complete, Lorange made the unusual decision to refill the mound. He wanted it to retain its original shape, standing as a monument rather than left hollow and scarred. The artifacts he recovered were sent to the Bergen Museum, where they were catalogued and preserved. His work brought valuable finds into the light, but it also left questions unanswered. Who was the man cremated inside the vessel? Why was his ship destroyed rather than carefully preserved? And why did this burial feel more like obliteration than reverence? What no one knew at the time was that Lorange had left behind more than the museum records and reports. Before sealing the mound again, he hid something in the soil. Among the ashes and rivets, Lorange left behind a secret of his own, one that would not be uncovered for another century and a half. Almost 150 years later, technology would offer archaeologists a fresh chance to peer into the void. Let's tell you what new remnants modern tools would reveal beneath the ashes. The 2024 reopening. For almost a century and a half, the mound at Myklebust lay sealed once more. Anders Lorange had opened it briefly in 1874, recorded what he could, and then filled the earth back in. His work revealed fragments of a story, but left vast gaps, mysteries that only deepened with time. To many, the mound seemed finished, its secrets swallowed again. But in 2024, a new generation of archaeologists returned, this time armed with technology Lorange could never have imagined. The team came from the University of Bergen, the University of Stavanger, and the Norwegian Directorate for Cultural Heritage. Their goal was not simply to reopen the trench, but to re-examine the site with modern tools that could see beneath the soil without disturbing it. Before a single shovel struck the ground, they scanned the mound with ground-penetrating radar. The results were striking. Hidden below the grass and earth were voids, warped layers, and scars of heat that confirmed Lorange's account of fire. Armed with this digital map, the archaeologists began their careful excavation. They did not rush. Every layer was documented, every fragment photographed and preserved. The soil itself was tested for traces of phosphate, which can reveal the presence of decayed organic matter. Slowly, new finds emerged. More than 600 additional ship rivets were recovered, corroded and fragile, but each one a piece of the great vessel that had once stood here. Together with Lorange's earlier discoveries, the count of rivets now exceeded 1,300, confirming the ship's extraordinary size. Some fragments of shield bosses were also found, though most were shattered beyond recognition. The fire that had consumed the ship seemed to have deliberately erased every clue. Then came a small but striking find. A bronze ring of Celtic origin, warped by heat but still identifiable. Its presence echoed the earlier discovery of the bronze urn. Both objects pointed to connections beyond Norway's fjords, suggesting trade, tribute, or plunder from distant lands. Whoever was buried here had ties to a wider world, and his wealth was undeniable. But the most astonishing discovery was not an artifact of the Viking Age at all. It was something left behind by Anders Lorange himself. As the team worked near the edge of the old trench, a glint of green glass appeared in the soil. Carefully, they uncovered a small bottle, sealed and hidden for nearly 150 years. Inside were 3 items: Lorange's business card, a few coins from 1874, and a folded piece of paper written in his hand. The note was not an official report. It was personal, almost confessional. Lorange described his dig, the discovery of burned weapons and decorations, and the eerie sense that the mound resisted him. He admitted that the fire had destroyed almost everything and feared that little would survive for future generations. His words carried weight across the century, as if he had written them not only for himself but for the archaeologists who would one day return. Holding that fragile note, the 2024 team felt a bridge across time. They were not just uncovering the burial of a forgotten Viking, they were continuing a conversation with the man who had first dared to dig. Lorange had left his mark, not in glory, but in a quiet message of frustration and wonder. Beyond the trench, surveys revealed even more. Traces of ancient farm structures suggested that the Myklebust farm was once a powerful center, the seat of a king or chieftain. The mound was not isolated, but part of a landscape of wealth, influence, and control. The burial did not just represent one man. It was a monument to a whole community that had once stood at the heart of Nordfjord. Then they find the message Lorange left, spoke of death and fire, Mentwaning name that could all this power, ritual, and blood be traced. Lorange's message in a bottle. When the archaeologists reopened the Myklebust mound in 2024, they expected to uncover objects from the Viking Age. What they did not expect was to find a message from the very man who had first dug into the mound a century and a half earlier. Buried in the soil of Anders Lorange's old trench was a small green glass bottle, sealed and hidden. a time capsule waiting patiently through the years. Inside the bottle were 3 simple items: Lorange's business card, a few coins from 1874, and a folded piece of paper. At first, the note was fragile. The ink faded and the paper brittle, but preservation specialists managed to steady it enough to be read. What the archaeologists found was not just a report of artifacts. It was something more personal, more revealing of the man who had stood in the trench before them. The letter was written in Lorange's own hand. Translated, it read, "This mound was excavated Anno Domini 1874, of Anders Lorange, Antiquarius Norvegiae. The mound is built over fallen men. They were burned in their ship with their weapons and decorations. Of shield bosses were 26, of swords 2, an axe and many arrows, in addition to many other old saws. The find is handed over to Bergen's museum." The note carried the tone of a man documenting his work for history, but also of someone leaving proof that he had been there. It was as if Lorange feared the mound itself might erase his presence, just as it had erased the story of the man buried within. He wanted his words to remain even if everything else was lost. Yet the letter also exposed uncertainties. Lorange counted only 26 shield bosses, though later records confirmed there were 44. He listed 2 swords, an axe, and many arrows, but left out other items that were known from the excavation. Perhaps he was relying on hurried notes from his assistants. Perhaps he underestimated what he had uncovered. Or perhaps he simply chose not to record everything, leaving gaps for reasons only he understood. For modern archaeologists, these discrepancies are important. They show how fragile the record of the past can be, depending not only on what survives in the ground, but also on the accuracy of the people who first dig it up. Lorange was a pioneer in his field, but he worked without the precise tools and methods available today. His bottle captures both the value and the limits of 19th century archaeology. There was another surprise in the note. At the bottom, Lorange had scribbled a runic inscription. He interpreted it himself as the words, "Emma Gade, my girlfriend." Emma Gade later became his wife, and the playful addition to the otherwise formal message gives the letter a deeply human touch. In the middle of a cursed mound surrounded by ash and rivets, Lorange had left behind not only scientific notes, but also a small token of his heart. For the archaeologists of 2024, holding that bottle was like reaching back in time. It connected their work to his, linking 2 moments separated by 150 years. They felt his frustration at the way the burial resisted interpretation. They understood his determination to record something, anything, before the mound collapsed into silence again. And they shared his curiosity about who the man beneath the shields and ashes had really been. The bottle was more than a relic. It was a reminder that archaeology is not just about the dead. It is also about the living, those who choose to uncover the past, those who record it, and those who return generations later to continue the search. Lorange's message became part of the story, just as much as the rivets, the weapons, or the bronze urn. Still, even with his words in hand, the mystery remained. The bottle explained what Lorange had seen, but it did not solve the question of identity. Who was the man burned in the ship? Who had been so powerful that he was buried in grandeur, yet so feared that he was locked away in silence? The note revealed not just what Lorange thought, but the gaps he left behind. And as scholars turned back to the sagas and the scattered artifacts, a name began to rise from the ashes. Who could the buried man be? The erased king, Audbjorn of Firda. For generations, the mound at Myklebust stood as a puzzle. Its vast size and the remains of a burned ship spoke of wealth and power, yet its silence and destruction told of erasure. Slowly, scholars began to piece together clues, comparing the fragments of weapons, the foreign objects, and the scale of the burial with the sagas that recorded Norway's earliest kings. From these comparisons, a name emerged, a name once feared, then forgotten. The man most likely to have been buried beneath the ash was King Audbjorn Froibjornsson of Firda. Firda, the region of the fjords, was his seat of power, and in the 9th century it was a strong and independent kingdom. Audbjorn is remembered in Snorre Sturluson's saga as a ruler who refused to bow to Harald Fairhair, the ambitious warlord determined to unite Norway under one crown. The sagas tell us that the conflict between Harald and Oddbjorn came to a head at the Battle of Solskjel, around the year 870. Oddbjorn gathered his forces, men from the fjords and coastal settlements, and sailed to meet Harald. But Harald's fleet was larger, better prepared, and ruthless. The battle was fierce, with ships clashing, warriors cut down by sword and axe, and fire consuming the decks. Oddbjorn's men fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. Trapped with no escape, many were slaughtered. Oddbjorn himself is said to have fallen there, his body broken in the mud and flames. Harald's victory at Solskjel was more than just a battlefield triumph. It was a turning point in the unification of Norway. By destroying Oddbjorn and his followers, Harald sent a clear message. Resistance would not be tolerated. Any rival who challenged his rule would be erased, not only in life, but in memory. This helps explain the strange burial at Myklebust. Oddbjorn's seat of power was almost certainly the Myklebust farm, one of the largest and most influential farms in Nordfjord. Only a man of royal status could have commanded the resources to build a ship of such size, and only a king would have been laid to rest in a mound 30 meters wide. The cremation, the shield bosses, the imported bronze urn, all of it points to someone of high rank. No other figure from the period matches the profile as closely as Oddbjorn. Yet the way he was buried is telling. Instead of being celebrated like the man at Gokstad or the women at Oseberg, Oddbjorn was consumed by fire. His ship was burned until its shape disappeared. His weapons were destroyed. His shields were stacked over him not as symbols of honor, but as a prison. Even the mound itself seemed designed to hide more than it revealed. This was not a king remembered with pride. It was a king buried with finality, his story locked in silence. In this way, the burial was a political act as much as a funeral. Harald Fairhair may have allowed Oddbjorn the grandeur of a ship burial, but he twisted the ritual into something darker. By burning the ship to ash, he denied Oddbjorn the eternal glory that ship graves usually carried. By erasing symbols of belief and scattering weapons in ruin, he made sure the dead king would not be celebrated as a hero. The mound became both a tomb and a warning. For centuries, that warning held. The stories of smoke, curses, and fear around the mound can be seen as echoes of the dread attached to Oddbjorn's memory. His burial was so different, so unsettling, that it inspired legends of danger rather than pride. He was not remembered as a noble ruler, but as a shadow to be avoided. Today, however, the picture is beginning to change. Reconstructions at the Sagastad Viking Center allow visitors to see what the Myklebust ship may have looked like before the fire consumed it. These reconstructions, along with the finds preserved in museums, give Oddbjorn a place once more in history. He is no longer just a ghost under a cursed mound. He is remembered as a king who stood against Harald Fairhair, a ruler who defied unification, and a man whose burial tells us as much about politics and vengeance as it does about ritual and belief. If Oddbjorn was erased once, might there be more such lost kings whose graves were burned, whose names faded, and what else waits under mounds untouched by time? Share your thoughts in the comments below.